Hey guys, Coach Chris here, back with another video. So I did not get in a game in 30 this week, like I hoped. So for those of you keeping track at home, the streak of weekly game in 30s that I intended ends with a gentleman's 1. Disappointing, but I did get in a couple of interesting Blitz games this week, and so I'll share one of them now. In this game, I'm white. It's a 5+3 against a 2032. I open with e4. Black responds e5. And I played the bishop's opening. Really enjoyed playing this lately. The idea is to construct a pawn structure that points towards the kingside and attack on that area of the board. This kingside knight, which often goes to f3, and the bishop opening more frequently goes to e2, keeping the f-pawn free to throw up the board. Really not masking intentions, just putting the bishop on the most aggressive square, attacking the weakest square in black's camp at the start of the game, before black castles. Bishop c5 from black. Knight c3, developing a piece towards the center. Black plays knight f6, developing his kingside pieces, preparing to castle if he wants. I play d3, avoiding any center fort trick type ideas by just defending the pawn with d3. And this is the pawn structure I was talking about. I want my pawns to point towards the kingside, which is the most likely home of black's king, and I want to go mate him on that side of the board. Black plays h6, and here's why. This is another example of why analyzing with an engine can sometimes not be very useful, because h6 is just awful. It doesn't develop a piece, it doesn't help control the center, it tries to prevent this bishop g5 idea, but the cure is worse than the disease black prevented. The whole point of this opening is to throw the kingside pawns up the board, and now if I get g5 in, this h6 pawn is a hook that will help me open up the position because I'll be attacking both the knight and the pawn. Something's going to have to give, and black's kingside will open up. That the engine doesn't even comment on this, it just feels wrong to me. f4, which is the whole idea. Here, I'm not at all worried about bishop takes g1. That would move a piece that's already developed. My rook would go on the square it would love to go to anyway, because that would assist the g-pawn up the board. My plan then would be really simple. Queen f3, bishop e3, castle long. That also gets the a1 rook in the game, and that position would be great. So not worried about losing kingside castling privileges in this position. d6, and now f5, a move that the engine doesn't really like, but again, this is sort of the whole point of this opening. We want a kingside space advantage. Typically the queen will go to f3, the knight will go to e2, we keep the g-pawn free to run. Black plays c6 with the idea of getting in d5. The principle of counterattacking through the center when your opponent is trying to attack on the flank remains valid. That's exactly what black tries to do, and I try to prevent that central counterplay. Queen f3, bringing another attacker to the d5 square. Black plays a5, and now the threat is b5 hitting the bishop, and if I drop back, a4, trapping the bishop. And so I play a4, trying to put a stop to black's queenside counterplay, but black really insists on it. Bishop d7, bringing another defender to the b5 square so that black can get in b5. Now I develop the kingside knight to e2, and black plays bishop b4. Again, the engine doesn't highlight this as a inaccuracy, mistake, or blunder, but it can't be right. Moving an already developed piece in a position where my pieces and pawns are already posted dangerously. I don't like bishop b4. It pins the knight, but just for a second. Bishop d2 unpins. I needed to develop that bishop anyway. Knight a6, and I thought the idea of knight a6 was to bring the knight. So knight a6 with the idea of bringing the knight to c5, I thought. Not really stopping my plan, so g4 is good to go. And then here the opponent moves the bishop back to c5. So I went to c5, b4, now back to c5, preparing the way for knight b4. That's a lot of time that black does not have in this position. h4, continuing the plan. Knight b4, threatening to fork on c2, but I was going to castle queenside anyway. And it looks like white has really castled into it. And that black's attack might be faster because there's a tempo gain on the bishop. And here I had an idea that was inaccurate, but I'm weirdly proud of this inaccuracy because it demonstrates that my thinking process has come a long way from where I started. My whole life I have played very passive chess, trying to be really solid and not make any mistakes, not really fighting for the initiative. I've really worked hard on changing that and trying to play very aggressive chess. And so already here, I'm looking to sacrifice the bishop on f7. There's no way in the world I'm going to drop the bishop back to a2, let black capture with check, me recapture and undevelop the knight and put it on a2. There's just no way I'm doing that. I didn't even consider what the engine says is obviously the best move of bishop b3. And the engine just points out that there's no real attack here. Black really has nothing to show for all this, and white's attack is still good to go. I didn't even consider dropping the bishop back, which, again, is inaccurate, but that my mistake was being aggressive and going forward, I'm proud of, because that shows progress in my thinking. And so I know that I want to sacrifice the bishop on f7, which would trap the king. On the king side, g5 would be coming. And so I was trying to think of the best way to do that. Could do it immediately, but I felt like throwing in this capture first was somehow more accurate. Here the engine points out that the best move is to just take this pawn. Again, didn't even realize that this pawn was hanging. Again, a mistake I'm kind of proud of, because grabbing this pawn is not really the point. Everything I have is pointing towards the king side. That's where I want to be playing. Grabbing a pawn on the queen side would just open up another file for him, and the point of chess is not to win a pawn. The point of chess is to deliver checkmate. And so didn't even see that the pawn was hanging and just went ahead and played bishop takes f7 check. King recaptures, and now g5. This is the move that I was envisioning way back when he played h6, and it lands pretty hard here. Engine says that the best move is king g8, which, when that's the case, you know something has gone terribly wrong, because that entombs this h8 rook. Black captures, I recapture, hitting the knight, and black plays a4. Now, the general principle is right in opposite side castling situations, and black, it's kind of like black is castled. But when kings are on opposite side of the board, material really doesn't matter. It's all about who can deliver the knockout blow first. And so black wanting to play on the side of the board where my king is makes sense, but just doesn't quite work here. I capture on h8 with my rook, forcing his queen to recapture so that I can bring my other rook into the game with tempo. So now this controls the open file, hitting the queen. Black moves the queen back to d8. I capture the knight, recaptures with the queen, and now material is equal. Black's king is much, much weaker, and it turns out that that a8 rook is a little loose. And of course, the most important factor is king safety. Black's king is just should not survive this. So queen h5 check. King can't go to e7 because then bishop g5 would win the queen, and so black plays g6. Here made a pretty significant mistake. It was a Blitz game. I was getting a little low on the clock, but my thinking mistake here was that I immediately ruled out queen h7 because black can respond queen g7. And I didn't want to trade a queens in this position because when you're attacking, when your opponent's king is weaker than yours, you generally want to keep queens on so that you can try to deliver checkmate. But if I had just calculated one move deeper and didn't immediately reject this, then I should have seen that in that position, you can just play f takes g6 check. King can't take because queen protects it. Queen can't take because it's pinned to the king. And so if that's true, then black has to move this king. The only place to move it where it still defends the queen would be on f8, but then rook f1 is just crushing. So should have calculated deeper, shouldn't have immediately rejected queen h7. The way I should have found that tactic was by thinking there must be a knockout blow here. There simply must be. The king is too weak. I've got stuff pointed at the king side. So I know there's a knockout blow. Well, how do I calculate it? You calculate it by checking the most forcing moves first. So should have found that. Didn't. Played f takes g6, which is still completely winning. Queen recaptures, and again, rook f1 first. I throw in king g7 and queen h4. Don't want to trade queens. Black plays rook e8, trying to keep my queen out of e7. Knight g3, bringing more pieces into the attack. Black really wants to trade queens to alleviate the pressure. Engine points out that queen f6 is more accurate. I played queen h6 check. Queen is protected by the bishop on d2. King retreats. Knight h5. And now there are just too many pieces surrounding the black king. Knight f6 is a horrible threat. Black prevents it, but blunders mate. So, interesting game. I felt like the opening went really well, even if the engine isn't thrilled with it. It's very human, very aggressive. Us sub-masters are poor defenders. Black wasted a lot of time. The kingside attack rolled pretty smoothly. I liked that if I'm going to make a mistake, I'm making it going forward. And then the kingside attack crashed through. So, interesting game. Hope you got something out of it. It was a fun one. I will try to get more game in 30s in next week. Keep grinding those tactics.